This is the Teacher Talking Time podcast.
Which leads to a very important question, because you wrote a paper in, I think it was 2021. And I'm going to actually just ask you the question. Was Krashen right?
Oh, can I take it? This is water, by the way. I need a sip of my water. Hold on a second.
Okay.
That was good timing.
As I told you, my throat is dry and my chest is hurting from this stupid allergy season we got going on here and all the rain that's coming down. It's probably mold. Yes, Steve was right. I consider, first of all, Steve is a friend of mine. Are we close friends? Do we live next door to each other? No, but we're friends. In fact, I just got an email from him yesterday about something. He and I did keynotes together at a conference about comprehensible input, and we were also co-featured speakers at an ACTFL meeting one year. We packed the room, like 500 people came into this room. They had to call the fire marshal because they thought, people were not trampling each other getting out of there. But so Steve and I have corresponded over the years, and I met him when I got my first job. He came to Michigan State. He was a keynote speaker along with somebody else. And it was not a conference I would normally attend. It was about African language teaching, or teaching of African languages, I should say. And but I got the organizer to say, yeah, I want to go to lunch with you guys. And so sat next to Steve, and he started giving me some mentoring advice because I was brand new in my career. I was like bummed, like, why don't people want to publish my stuff? What's going on? He would say, Bill, you just, don't give up. Here's what you do. And he just gave me for like a year. I kept in touch with him. He just gave me some good fatherly, solid mentoring advice. And then my career took off after that. And we've always agreed like 99.9% of the time, not 100% of the time. And so when Karen Lichtman and I wrote that article, Was Krashen Right? What we wanted to do was go back, wind up, let me backtrack. In the 1980s, Krashen launched his original hypothesis in the late 70s. He wrote his first book in the early 80s, like 82. Then he started working on some other things. So by the early to mid 80s, his ideas were out there and were big. The backlash in the language teaching community and in some of the L2 scholarship community was pretty nasty. They did not want to hear about this. In fact, I was told, because I was doing second language research in Spanish classrooms in the US, well, you can't do that. We're foreign language learners. We're not second language learners. And I would argue, no, it's all the same. The context is no different. A learner is a learner is a learner. Yeah. Oh no, and I got blacklisted for a while from national organizations. Oh yeah. Wow. And there was movement. There was a big movement called Krashen bashing.
Really?
Krashen
bashing.
Here you're gonna love this. Fast forward, and we'll come back and go. I'll rewind. Fast forward to the late 90s, early 2000s. And there were people who started doing VanPatten bashing. That was a thing. I heard about it.
That's how you know you made it. That's how you know you made it.
I heard about it. Yes, there were groups of people getting together to bash me. Anyway, and they tried to do it in print, and I took care of that. And look, now it's all gone.
Did Steve call you and say you did it?
No. Well, Steve didn't hear about it. I heard about it anyway. So I've been in the profession long enough to watch how some ideas take root and they go underground. And what people do is they rediscover them and they give them a new name. Or they tackle a topic but they don't want to take it back to its source. And a lot of the times it happens in the field of L2 research. You've got younger scholars who don't know the original research. It's just absolutely, to me, embarrassing. They don't know the basic foundational research from the 70s and 80s that got the field started. That research has not gone away and been disproven. They just don't know it because their graduate programs aren't making them exposed to it. There's too much of a push now that you got to be in the 2020s. And well, I'm sorry, but where would physics be right now without Albert Einstein from 1912, right? Okay, so I approached Karen and said, we need to do something because Krashen's ideas are foundational for contemporary L2 research and teaching, but nobody really gives the guy credit and understands, you know, what's really happened, what hasn't been disproved. Because we would hear things like, "Oh, Krashen, that's old theory. We haven't. Nobody. That's been disproven."
That's
No, it
usually
hasn't.
the how they dismiss it. They say it's old theory, it's from the 80s,
Yeah,
whatever.
it has been disproven. Exactly. So what we said is no. And so we wrote an article to show how it wasn't, and how a lot of the ideas were just transformed with different terminology, and people don't even know, they don't even trace it back to Krashen's original ideas. So he was right.
So what are some of those ideas then? Because
Well,
I remember one of the most problematic, actually, I found it here. I want to just mention this to you. There's an article saying here, Krashen bashing was apparently in vogue in the 80s. Yeah. So
yeah,
you were right. I didn't know that.
yep. So one of the foundational ideas is the role of comprehensible communicative embedded comprehensible input. That's his input hypothesis is foundational. You get language in your head, and you learn languages or acquire languages through your exposure to input embedded in communicative context. Okay, foundational. That is now mainstream in almost every single theory in L2 in second language research. Not all, but most theories. There are a couple of theories I consider wacko, but that's, I won't mention who they are. But even theories that, let's take, for example, like a generative theory like I come from, and a psycholinguistic theory like I come from, as opposed to the usage-based theories that don't believe in a Chomskyan module in the head for language. Okay, so you don't believe in UG, I believe in UG, universal grammar. But both theories go, you cannot get language in your head, whatever you want to call it, you cannot get in your head without exposure to input and lots of it. End of story. So even theories that look to be in competition have some basic fundamental things. That's one. Another thing that he commented on was that the difference between acquisition and learning.
Right.
Okay, so learning is your explicit learning, you know, like you said earlier, Leo, you learn the 10 Lexis items for the day, and here's my grammar rule, you know, PPP, let's teach it and practice it and blah, blah, blah. He said that results in one kind of knowledge, but that's not the knowledge you need for language.
Right.
There's acquisition, which is through processing input, and stuff happens in your head over time. That has morphed into what we now call explicit implicit learning. And here's what's interesting. We spent decades where people were trying to make a case for explicit learning and explicit learning, ignoring the acquisition learning distinction. And if push comes to shove, because the explicit learning distinction comes from psychology, not from linguistics. If push comes to shove, 95% of the people working in the field would say, yeah, language learning is almost all implicit. Explicit plays only a minor role, if any role at all. That means Krashen was right about acquisition is more fundamental than learning. Okay, so that's another example. And he talked a little bit about the affective filter, about language not getting in your head and so on. And he was basically right. There's been a lot of research done on motivation and attitude and things like that. It's been researched the wrong way, but when you sit back and look at the research in its entirety, you realize, yeah, he is right. There's stuff that keeps people, it just blocks them, you know, because this happened to me in French. I remember the first time I was with some native speakers, I was telling you the stories earlier, I was scared, you know what, Liz? I couldn't, they were speaking stuff, oh my God. And I kind of like froze and shut off. I stopped paying attention, right? My affective filter went up. So those things he talked about, those are 3 examples. He basically had 5 components of his theory, his model. Right. And those have endured. Well, Karen and I talk about in that article, so I'm glad you mentioned. I hope your listeners actually read that. It was published in 2021 in Foreign Language Annals.
We're going to link it to the show notes, because I remember when I read that was the paper. I was like, okay, I need to get Bill on the podcast. It took me 3 years to get you on the podcast, but here we are.
I'm in such demand.
I know.
Well, now that I'm done with my show in Las Vegas, I have a little more free time.
Right. And
Celine Dion can't do it anymore, so I had to step in. So.
There you go.
I mean, someone has to do it.
What is the Gotcha. What is the pushback? Or 1979, did Krashen come out with that? Something like this a few years ago. Why do you think it's still such an issue that people are talking about? Why haven't we accepted it?
I'll tell you why. I think in the research circles, they have accepted it. They just don't credit Krashen, except in passing. So this is a lot of what Krashen said in the late 70s or 80s is now part of mainstream theory. Like I said, it went underground, surfaced with different jargon and so on. So it's there. It is absolutely foundational. In fact, can I just put a plug in right now before I finish answering your question, Andrew?
Yeah.
If your readers out there want to know anything about the field, there's 3 things to read that are foundational in my mind. You read S. Pitt Corder's The Significance of Learners' Errors. You read Larry Selinker's Inner Language paper from 1972. And you read Krashen's book from 1982. He wrote before that, but he put all the ideas together in his book in 1982. I think it was called Principles and Practice in Second Language Acquisition, or of Second Language Acquisition. So those are foundational. Read those things. Everything we do is traced back to those in some way or another.